Now, the perceiver. Human beings are not just mechanical and passive recipients of stimuli from the external world. They are creative beings and try to understand the external world in their own ways. In this process, their motivations and expectations, cultural knowledge, past experiences, and memories, as well as values, beliefs, and attitudes, play an important role in giving meaning to the external world. So, these factors are such as first, motivation. The needs and desires of a perceiver strongly influence his perception. People want to fulfill their needs and desires through various means. One way to do this is to perceive objects in a picture as something that will satisfy their need. Experiments were conducted to examine the influence of hunger on perception. When hungry persons were shown ambiguous pictures, they were found to perceive them as pictures of food objects than satis- more often than satiated, that is non-hungry persons. Expectations or perceptual sets. The expectations about what we might perceive in a given situation also influence our perception. This phenomenon of perceptual familiarization or perceptual generalization reflects a strong tendency to see what we expect to see even when the results do not accurately reflect external reality. For example, if a milkman delivers uh, milk to you daily at about 5:30 a.m. and knocking at the door, and when there will be any knocking at the door around that time, then it is likely to be perceived by you as a presence of the milkman even if it is someone else. Now, cognitive styles. Cognitive style refers to a consistent way of dealing with our environment. It significantly affects the way we perceive the environment. There are several cognitive styles that people use in perceiving their environment. One most extensively used in studies is the field dependent and field independent cognitive style. Field dependent people perceive the external world in its totality, that is, in a global or holistic manner. On the other hand, field independent people perceive the external world by breaking it into smaller units, that is, in an analytic or differentiated manner. So, the individuals who are able to locate the any shape, such as triangle, counting of the triangle in any of the shape given of two types, who are able to recognize it fast, so he can do it. Those who can do it quickly will be called as field independent. Those who take long time will be called field dependent. Right? Cultural background and experiences. Different experiences and learning opportunities available to people in different cultural settings also influence their perception. People coming from a pictureless environment fail to recognize objects in pictures. Hudson studied the perception of pictures by African subjects and noted several difficulties. Many of them were unable to identify objects depicted in pictures. For example, antelope spear. They also failed to perceive distance in pictures and interpreted pictures incorrectly. Eskimos have been found to make fine distinction among a variety of snow that we may be unable to notice. Some aboriginal groups of Siberian region have been found to differentiate among dozens of skin colors of reindeers which we would not be able to do. These studies indicate that the perceiver plays a key role in the process of perception. People process and interpret stimuli in their own ways depending on their personal, social, and cultural conditions. Due to these factors, our perceptions are not only finely tuned but also modified. Another topic is principles of perceptual organization. Principles of perceptual organization. Our visual field is a collection of different elements, such as points, lines, and colors. However, we perceive these elements as organized wholes or complete objects. For example, we see a bicycle as a complete object, not as a collection of different parts. For example, saddle, wheel, handle. The process of organizing visual field into meaningful wholes is known as form perception. So, you might wonder that how different parts of an object are organized into a meaningful whole. And there might be question coming in your mind that there are certain if there are certain factors that facilitate or inhibit this process of organization. So several scholars have tried to answer these kind of questions, but the most widely accepted answer has been given by a group of researchers called Gestalt psychologists. Prominent among them are Kohler, Kafka, and Wertheimer. Gestalt means a regular figure or a form. According to Gestalt psychologists, we perceive different stimuli not as discrete elements but as an organized whole that carries a definite form. They believe that the form of an object lies in its whole, which is different from the sum of their parts. For example, a flower pot with a bunch of flowers is a whole. If the flowers are removed, the flower pot still remains a whole. It is the configuration of the flower pot that has changed. Flower pot with flowers is one configuration. Without flowers, it is another configuration. The, dis- the gestalt psychologists also indicate that our cerebral processes are always oriented towards the perception of a good figure or pregnancy. That is the reason why we perceive everything in an organized form. The most primitive organization takes place in the form of figure ground segregation. When we look at a surface, certain aspects of the surface clearly stand out as separate entities, whereas others do not. For example, when we see words on a page or a painting on a wall or birds flying in the sky, the words, the painting, and the birds stands out from the background and are perceived as figures, while the page, wall, and sky stay behind the figure and are perceived as background. There's a famous Robin's vase where the white part of the fig we will see that there's a black and the white background and the picture, so which looks like a vase, flower pot, or the black part of the figure which looks like two faces. So the white part of the figure looks like a vase and flower pot, or the black part of the figure which looks like two faces in the Rubens vase. So we distinguish from this figure from the ground on the basis of the following characteristics. Figure has a definite form while the background is relatively formless. Figure is more organized as compared to this background. Figure has a clear contour outline while the background is contourless. Figure stands out from the background while the background stays behind the figure. Figure appears more clear, limited, and relatively nearer, while the background appears relatively unclear, unlimited, and away from us. The discussion presented above indicates that human beings perceive the world in organized wholes rather than in discrete parts. The Gestalt psychologists have given us laws to explain how and why different stimuli in our visual field are organized into meaningful whole objects. Now, let us look at these principles in detail. First, the principle of proximity. Objects that are close together in a space or time are perceived as belonging together or as a group. Next, the principle of similarity. The principle of similarity. Objects that are similar to one another and have similar characteristics are perceived as a group. According to this principle, the areas surrounded by others tend to be perceived as figures. Now, the principle of closure. We tend to fill the gaps in stimulation and perceive the objects as whole rather than their separate parts.